the way this book works, it starts with a quote from Marcus Aurelius, and then it continues with my own riff on that. And in case some people are here and not knowing what they signed up for, you signed up for a discussion on the link between poetry and business, or art and business, or just life, because you think they're different. They're not. Let neither uniqueness nor value escape you. Marcus Aurelius. An argument levied against poetry is that the market for poetry is poets. It's an argument often made by people who at some time or another willingly purchased fiction or nonfiction, bought paintings or photographs, spent money on music or instruments, or got tickets to shows or theater. Maybe that speaks to some of you in this room. And in fact, the chances are high that most people have dedicated money or time to these art forms on multiple occasions. These same people, the ones that went to the movies and things like that, they may know little about writing, they may know little about visual art, they may know little about music theory, and they may know little about drama. Consider this. The film industry relies on ticket sales from people who have never considered cinematography as a hobby, let alone a profession. Most art museum tickets are not purchased by artists. A concert venue fills hundreds to thousands of seats with people who have no musical training whatsoever. People outside one art form continue to find value in an art form. While poetry has struggled in the U.S. to reach broader audiences than poets, to blame the medium as the culprit could at best be lazy and at worst willfully ignorant. Instead of asking whether poetry can reach more mass appeal, perhaps the better question is, what am I doing as a poet to reach beyond poets? The poetry event I organize can focus on single fathers. The poetry book I write can contain interviews with healthcare professionals. The poetry chapbook I compile can be made into a children's story and tour at libraries. The poetry reading I give at a luncheon can be also at a park or for families with dogs. The poetry anthology I create can ask friends to translate poems from their first language into English. I don't really care what you do, but whatever the act is, act in a way to remove what little separates poetry from people.
Thank you to everybody who has come out this evening to celebrate my good friend Jeff's brand new, I'm going to call him child, but he has a child in the room. But brand new book. And I'm really excited for what this book is doing and what this book has done already for the author. But to kind of introduce you to everybody sitting here, first of all, we have Dante Woods Spikes, documentarian, videographer, archivist, and author of So Long Unfinished Goodbyes with the Children with COVID. Great guy, just in general, but he is also somebody who has a work out in the world that he's not stopped working, right? And so that's really, really important. My name is Matthias. I am a poet, filmmaker, documentarian, comedian. Yes, I am hilarious. And I co-host a podcast on the Diversus platform, Art and Offers. And yes, I just do some stuff here and there. And yeah, finally, we have, again, the man of the hour, the guy we're all here for, Geoff Anderson. Some of you know him as a poet or a facilitator, friend. Some of you gave birth to him, and all of you, I'm sure, are excited for this brand new book, Meditations for the Independent Poet. And today we get to talk about the book. We get to talk about life as artists that are doing things for not only their art, but for their lives, to be able to enrich both and hopefully be able to push each forward. I guess, I think it would be apropos. I just put it in words. Apropos to, I think, kind of start off with Meditations for the Independent Poet, Essays on the Business of Art. Jeff, why the name?
So, like I said, this is from Marcus Aurelius's collection, Meditations. Anyone here read Meditation? It's one person. Okay, appreciate that. Well, so I wanted something that kind of harkens back to Marcus, and then also something that connects it to the central premise, which is trying to get people to view whatever art form that they're doing as a way to achieve creative and financial independence. So that's where the independent comes from. It's also, we talked about this on the podcast this week. We talked about how it's very important when people see what you're doing, whatever it is that you're doing, that they can self-select to say, yes, I'm in alignment with what you're doing, or no, what you're doing is horrible. There's no way I could be with that, because we get very comfortable sticking in the middle that just appeals what we think to everybody, but in reality actually appeals to no one. So when people look at what we have, they have to be able to make a decision that I agree, I disagree, because the last thing that we want is to people to see what we're doing and to have no thought on it whatsoever.
Yeah. And I think that, one of the things that you even talked about in the excerpt that you opened up the night with, just kind of the idea of, the perception around poetry being that, like, it's an audience, like the audience is poets. And so it's really hard to kind of build things based off of that, or kind of build like kind of a market off of that. And speaking from somebody's perspective who wrote a book that was not necessarily connected to poetry, but is much more in tune with like the youth and things like that. Can you maybe speak to like maybe some of the hurdles that you might have faced in that space?
Uh, the one of the biggest hurdles I faced was learning how to sit down it, and actually go from the beginning to the end. You can have all the ideas in the world, but if you can't take time to sit down and spend time with whatever it is you want to create, that is not going to happen. Um, and I was explaining to your father what I appreciate about you is the process in explaining the process to the hopeful creative person, where you have an idea and you become so hopeful, but what happens is you cross those barriers and that heartbreak and that confusion when something comes up where you might not get published. You thought you were going to get published, or an opportunity is given to you and it doesn't work the way you thought it would. Um, Understanding that there was a process to getting to the very end is the most important part. My biggest hurdle, and I've shared this before, was what I was attempting to create. You run into editors. Some editors will say, I ain't editing this. And I chose to speak in my personal vernacular, the way I spoke to the kids and the way we had conversations with each other. It got sent back to me because they said it's in proper English multiple times. But I was lucky enough to find someone that understood and said, like, this is perfect because this is the story that you're telling. So I would say the biggest hurdle for me was sticking to what I wanted to create versus trying to change it. I'm not against someone saying, hey, think about this. You might want to look at this, give this a opportunity to become something different. But once you finished a product or a creation, you know that it is yours and you know that it's not to be changed. Um, Understanding when I made it to the point where it was mine and no one else's to tell me to do it different.
Mm, gotcha. I think that speaks to getting attached to results or the process. You don't control a lot of results. Like if I'm submitting to a publisher, what I'm basically saying is I revoke all power on my end and instead give it to you to determine the outcome. Versus if I instead shift my focus to be like, my goal is to have a book in my hands by the end of this month. I can control that. Or I can't control what the publisher is going to take it. And I think a lot of times, especially in like the social media age, we're very attached to external validation as proof and attachment instead of focusing on the things we can control. I can't control how many likes a post gets. I can't control how many views something gets, but I do control if I put something out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And one of the things that like you were speaking on and you touched but on a little bit just now, but also in the opening excerpt is maybe just like the idea of like you don't really control who's necessarily like attracted to your work or who's like kind of like coming to your work, but you can in a way kind of control who you're speaking to and who you're who you're making an attempt to reach, because you can kind of almost streamline how you're presenting and like different things about your brand or what you're doing in order to kind of appeal to them. I know with your book, you've been able to get into multiple bookstores, you've had multiple speaking engagements, and I'm, kind of speaking to this new book, who would you say that you're attempting to reach with this?
Well, first off, I mean, before we even talk about that, just like everyone in here has already made a decision today about who you're trying to reach. I mean, just look at what you're wearing. You're directly trying to tell people a message. Like, so you're trying to invite some people and you're also trying to turn some people off automatically. So this isn't something you just automatically avoid. Question was, who am I trying to reach? Yeah, so a couple things with this book. If you just look at it, I mean, it's hardcover versus paperback. The shirt cover is expensive. Ooh, I can't afford that. I'm not paying for hardcover. Cool, you're not. It's not for you. It's not a flashy cover. It's got one symbol on it. So if you're looking for something that has like lots of like splash and things on the cover, it's not for you. It starts off, the very first word is meditations. If you hear the word meditation, it's like, I don't want to do that. It's not for you. So all, everything is a marker.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're like, ooh, minimalist cover, let me just throw this on my coffee table to look good and things like that. Or if you're the type of person that's like, I don't have time to actually read it, but I want to look sophisticated. I want to look fancy. This book might be for you. If you're just drawn to, oh, I'm tired of reading books about like white pages, like, ooh, look at that. Black pages? Geoff. So I see what you did. This book might be like, if you're just looking to try to find things that look a little bit different and out of the ordinary, this book might be for you. If you see that word independent poet and you're like, I'm intrigued. Poet that can live on poetry? Yeah. This book might be for you. So it's like, every element of this, because I think Matthias and I on our podcast, we talk a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In case you haven't done your psych class in a while, that's basically talking about why do you do the things you do? It starts off low, like food. We all need to eat. Drink. We all got to drink. Then like clothing and things like that. Most people, this book is going to be engaging with, fortunately, have a place to live and have food and have shelter. So what's next? Yeah. Belonging, sense of community, relationships, status, and then right at the top you have self-actualization. This book is appealing to those higher tiers. I'm a firm believer that most of the reason people do a lot of what they do is because of the sense of belonging they have with their community. They're like, I belong to this community, or I want to belong to this community, so I'm going to act this way. Which is also linked to status. Like, I want people in this community to view me a certain way. It's why I think you see a lot of, in the poetry community, you see a lot of poets. You ask them, hey, when's the last time you read a poem from like the 1800s or something like that? They'll be like, no. When's the last time you read a poem from, someone that just put a book out recently in the poetry community? It's like, oh yeah, just yesterday. Why is that? I think a lot of that has to do with status, to show I'm up to date with my contemporaries. And now I don't have any issue with that. I do things for status, but let's also not be in denial about why we do the things we do. there are people out there that read Hanif because it looks good for them to read Hanif, you know? And fortunately, Hanif's also a good writer, so you're going to get that benefit too. But, you know, let's also be honest about why are we doing the things we're doing? Why am I reading the book I'm reading? Why am I talking to the person I'm talking to?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think about, you know, when it comes to like that presentation, or when it comes to like kind of like the core purpose of the book, it in a lot of ways kind of an expansion of like a lot of the work that you're doing with diverses. And I think, you know, we run across, you know, individual poets kind of all the time that are uh like, even if they try, they are themselves in the motions of trying very, very diligently to write poems and create new poems, and then hopefully maybe they create a book or anything like that. No matter what they create, they're never thinking of like, okay, like how do I turn this into what I do? How do I turn like my art or what I'm doing into like what I'm doing for a living? And can you maybe talk a little bit about maybe what that switch was for you, where you decided that this is something I'm going to pursue, as opposed to saying, well, I'm fine with just being like, you know, I can publish some poems here and there and see what works.
Can I summarize that question as like, why did I write this? So I don't do a lot of submissions right now. There was a phase where I was very heavy into submitting poems. It was good. I got into journals that I'm very happy with. I got into fellowships I'm very happy with. There is something to credential building. One of the things that happened was I had a chapbook I was sending out, and it got shortlisted twice. And the judge, like the final judge, both times was the same person for both. And this happened like in like a 6 month, in like a 6 month span. And it was just like, see. So like the first submission, I was like, okay. But then the second submission, I was like, oh, cool, it's finalist. Who's the judge? You shoot it again, really? So I already know how this is gonna turn out.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this idea that for a lot of actions, and these moments have names, so if there's anyone that's, let's say, psychology, you can probably point to it better than I can. But there's a lot of times in life there's like an initial trigger that makes you realize a situation. And usually that's not enough to like spur you to action, but it's the one that kind of makes you realize the situation. And then after that, oftentimes it can be like much later. There's something that kind of re-triggers it and actually spurs you to act, you know? And I think that these sorts of moments kind of made me think about, I don't really, when I'm doing these submissions, I don't have control of the result. You know, I don't have control if it's going to get accepted or not. And I'm putting a lot of weight onto that. And like I'm putting my future in the hands of other people that I don't know. And I don't control what they're going to do with my work.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, I just kind of really started questioning, you know, how can I avoid that? And at the same time, the poetry world is so based around, there's a very linear route. You know, you get poems published, you apply for the MFA, you get a chapbook out, then you get a book out, then you apply for a professor job. That professor job's for probably going to be adjunct. And then after a couple of years, maybe you'll get visiting professor. And then some people still are holding out for tenure positions, even though those are not going to be existing probably in like the next 10, 15 years, you know? So that's one path, and it's tried and true, and it works. I don't have an issue with that. What's the other side look like? And honestly, there's not really an example to point to. So that's kind of just the question I've been asking myself when I was writing this book. Well, what does the other side look like? Can I get other people to start thinking about what the other side looks like? That's what this book is. It doesn't have answers, but it does hopefully give you the questions to move.
Okay. And Dante, so and you also, in my practice, you self-published. And I think about, you know, this was that was Quatrain. Quatrain was the year before last, right? It wasn't last year. This is Thursday, Tuesday. Yeah, something like time is subjective. But I remember, and I mean, that's not when you published it, though. It goes before that. But like, I know you were talking about like that process and what it felt like for you to take something that was, and I think like creating things is like a very kind of unique experience, because like this thing only existed in my imagination before it was a solid object in 3D, like three-dimensional space. And so what was that process like for you as far as like deciding that you're going to take, the fate of this work into your own hands and putting it out yourself?
Um, so it kind of started off as a joke because I was like, "Ha, I should write a book." Ha 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 ha. Right? And somebody was like, "Let's go." And what's interesting is the book that I wrote is not my original idea. It's a test book. But unexpectedly, the test book ended up doing far better than I anticipated.
A test book is crazy. Looking to light a test.
Yeah, I'm gonna write a test book and see what happens with it because I'm like, I want to figure out um how this works. Like anybody play video games? You ever create a character, right? And then you beat the game, and then you create another character the second go around, and you like, dang, I know where everything is, I know how to operate, I know where to chest it. It's like so much easier with that second character, right? So I was thinking that the first book is gonna be like my first character, right? And the second book was gonna be like my second play through the game, where I'm like, I get it, I know what to expect, I know who I'm dealing with, I know where to place things, I know where not to go, I know who to trust, I know who to talk to. Um, but I use that first creation to figure out how things work. It was not I never said to myself, now that I have a book, that's it. And I think that's where people get caught or they get stuck because everyone questions, well, I have a book, who wants to read it? And if in that moment where you're doing a book release or you make one post and it doesn't happen the way you want it to, it's like, well, I guess I failed. I guess I didn't create a book that everybody cares about. The thing about being self-published is your book never gets old. My book is 4.5. I'm about to be at the book festival talking like it's the newest thing ever.
Yeah.
You know? Um, I take full advantage of the fact it never gets old because the whole world hasn't heard about it. So I have multiple opportunities to talk about this creation as if it's completely new. That's the way I look at the final product that I have. It's like Snickers is my favorite candy bar. Same candy bar. It's been there for I don't know how long. But every now and then I'm like, I want a Snickers. I know what I'm getting.
There's also people out there who have still never heard of Snickers.
Wait, because I'm eating them all. But I will say once you have something created, understanding that it's the beginning, not the ending. That's not it. There's been spaces where I thought no one was going to show up. Sold more books than I anticipated. Spaces where I'm like, oh, I know everybody about to show up. I got like 500 shares. I got like 3,000 likes. I mean, 2 people show up. That's a real story too, where I had an event where there was an ant. The ant showed up and a dude that was lost. So, and we just gave you like pity, like I guess so. But knowing what you have and knowing that you have limitless opportunities to constantly put it out into the world is the best way to look at finishing something. And to speak to poets, I feel like poets are one of the few
Careful.
artists.
Okay.
Just be careful. I'm up. One of the few artists that have been able to tap into this medium and understanding how to take my art and make it a business because it's so immediate. It's literally coming from within inside of you. And once you speak it, when your poem is done, it's like, okay, did you like it? Did anyone hear it? Is it worthy of being published? Can this be turned into a book? It's a lot of internal dialogue that happens versus someone that has the opportunity to create a product and say, I have something that I could physically give someone. But I think this book is a great start for poets to understand that everyone speaks. It's one of the first things we all learn how to do. It's our form of communication. And like to be a speaker, you get paid to go places and speak. You get paid to write words that people are reading. But the poet doesn't always get that opportunity. And I think what happens is poets can count themselves out because of the comparison or the point that you made. Um, Sometimes imitation of the most popular or well-known poet or poetry in a moment. If this is what's working, I'm going to try and change my stuff up a little bit. But you start to see that there's a machine that exists that select specific individuals to do that. It doesn't always work in a way where you can do that and it'll start to happen for you. So just knowing when you have something, back to what I said before, it belongs to you and you had limitless opportunities to put it out into the world the way you see fit versus the way you think people want you to put it out there.
I think it also speaks to the section I want to read. You have these endless opportunities. Not all those opportunities are going to go well. And the thing is, you control the metric for success, though. So you can have the reading that 2 people show up to and be like, this was a failure.
Ain't.
So yeah. But a lot of this is also mindset work too, because you can be like, just the fact that I was asked to do a reading was the success. So same event, same people there, completely different outcome though, how you see it. And I think once you understand that you control the metrics for your own success, then you can also kind of take more risk, because I think a lot of us are start doing things that make us feel very safe. We're at the job we have because it's like, oh, I want to do this other job, but insurance, or I want to do this other job, but I'm comfortable. It's really hard to change when you're comfortable, but safety isn't safe. Like, new boss comes in, they don't like you, you're gone. Economy changes, tariffs, you're gone. Doesn't matter. Like, past success does not determine tomorrow's success. Like, this is all a risk. You just feel comfortable even as your floor is sinking, So it's like, once you understand that everything's already a risk, I think you become more open to taking risks. There's something I want to talk to you about. I'm in your books. If you go to page 39, I think this also speaks to the idea that the things I'm asking poets to do who take this work seriously, you're going to have to do things you don't like, because it's not just going to be writing. 39. No one should hear you lamenting the court life or your own. The woodpecker has a choice. A tree may take 1,000 knocks for food. The problem is there's no guarantee. Time spent burrowing is time not spent trying a different trunk. Fortunately, I'm not a woodpecker. Whether I starve is not determined by one mistake. And I've always made mistakes without fail. I misread a poem at open mic. I make the wrong comment giving feedback on a piece. I see another poet's success with envy. My enthusiasm pushes other people away. There's value in finding errors in my own actions. Whenever I have a new student, before our call is over, I tell them we are 10,000 mistakes away from the knowledge that we see. An opportunity for correction is the soil for growth. Learning through others is no different. Reading others' poems, those I enjoy and those I don't, I learn how to write and how not to write. Hearing others' poems, regardless of the ovation they receive, I learn how to perform and how not to perform. The poem with mistakes still teaches, regardless of whether I enjoy it. A rotten crab apple on the branch still feeds, regardless of whether I eat. All that to say that, we still got to be putting in the work, and we don't know the results of that work, and that result may not give me necessarily the outcome I want, but it's still going to give an outcome that is going to be productive. for me.
Yeah. One of the things that we touch on a lot in the podcast too, and I think like this, like that one, like really brings that as well. You know, there's a tendency to look at like every situation as like pass fail. You know what I mean? Like, slam is a really good space for like that kind of like feeling to be kind of planted because slam there is, unless it's like a team, there's like one winner and every round you're given a score. So like you're constantly reminded of where you are in proximity to other people. And a lot of times you can start to think about that as an objective metric. And so people will walk away from slams. Like I've seen, like it happens all the time. Like people will walk away from slams and then they'll go up to the judges and they'll be like, what did I do wrong? Like, what can I do better? I'm like, these people are not the people like this is like a subjective, these people are like subjectively applying a score to a space. And I think about like, whether or not you won that slam should not be what well, maybe for you in your personal experience shouldn't be judged about, whether or not you necessarily won. But did you learn something? What are you able to take away from that experience? And to kind of like, again, push yourself into possibly other spaces or maybe even your next slam. And I think about that a lot because like, again, when it comes to a lot of what you talk about either in podcast spaces or just in like different events, you're thinking less about, whether or not you won necessarily an engagement, but thinking that regardless of the engagement, you should be taking something away from it. And I think that's something that's like really crucial to the artist experience.
And those barometers, like one of my favorite slam experiences was, so if you've never been to a poetry slam, the way it works is person reads a poem, you get graded on the poem from a scale from 0 to 10. There are things that you would probably expect to happen, like grade creep. So it's like by the end of the slam, like everyone's getting like 9s and things like that. It's a very common experience. So I was a judge for competition, and um, and it starts off there's like a sacrificial poet, just to kind of we could talk about it. This guy like set in theory kind of set the barometer, So sacrificial poet gets they get their grade like, hey, I gave a 5. And and there's always silence the first time that happens. So it's just like, oh no, did you hear that poem? So then the next poet comes up. They did worse than the sacrificial poet. But they're going, hey, 8.5. You did worse. 3. So that's the reaction at first. And people are like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But what happens after a couple rounds of this? Suddenly those low scores, like, oh, 4. Ooh, that person did all right. They got 0, Or it's like, the one time where I gave a 5 towards the end of the slam, everyone's like applauding and like, Joe, that was a really good, but it's like, but when the other judges are giving 9s, no one cares about those judges. People are waiting for my score. You can control the setting.
I remember that slam. But I think it is funny because like Geoff you have this kind of reputation in the poetry community. It's good, but it's also, it's like me and Zach Hanna, he's another poet in our in the poetry community, really great poet. But we're talking about like, if you guys are workshopping poems and you bring your poem to Geoff, like pray for your first. Just to be like, what happened to that poem afterwards? It might not be the same poem that you came to him with, but I think there's something incredibly earnest about how consistent he is, like with everybody's work and including his own. But it's just, I think there's an earnest nature to this like consistency that you have, where you're like like your own work, what you are putting out, and that extends to this book, that extends to the podcast, and that extends to everything. You're scrutinizing it because you're looking at it not for how likable a person is or how likable a space is or how likable a presentation is, but what you think is the healthiest thing for the work that you're forging ahead.
But yes, but this is true for everyone in this room. Like Poets hate business terms. So I hate the ass out, but this gets back to brand. If you don't like the word brand, fine. Let's use the word reputation. Does that sound better to you? Because it's the same idea. It's the same. What do people think about you when they think about you? That's what I want people to think about me when they think about me. A lot of us aren't thinking about that. We're just like we're just going about our days with this. But that's what people are now thinking about you, because they're like, oh, this person doesn't worry about this. They don't care about this stuff. So, but you're still putting out into the world how people are viewing you. You still have a brand. You still have a reputation. Whether you don't want to, that's now part of your reputation. So if you're going to have it anyways, why not be intentional about it? You control it.
Question.
Answer.
So when you critique a poem and you tell the truth about it, what does that feel like for you? Like, it's obvious that you take pride in being honest. And I don't think it's anything like malicious, but somebody could be like, well, damn, lie to me a little bit, Geoff. No. What does it feel like for you? Because I could assume some people may be in a very sensitive space with their creations. And if they hear someone say, think about this, change this up, that needs to be taken out. Like, what does that feel like for you to go through with that and be the person to say, you got to do something with that?
Okay, so like when you go to the hospital, you're not immediately wheeled into the operating room. They ask you what's wrong. They ask you what you want. They're trying to figure out why you're there.
Okay.
When I take a call with a client so I have like a teaching business, that first call, my entire job is to figure out why are we even having this call in the first place? Because most likely, so I teach like pronunciation. You didn't just wake up with an accent yesterday, right? You've probably, as long as you've learned the language, you probably had something. But here we are now, probably years later, and you're signing up for this class to figure out what's going on. So I'm trying to figure out, like, why did we suddenly go from not studying pronunciation to studying pronunciation? That didn't just happen. There was a trigger. There's always a trigger. You don't just change your behavior for no reason. Like, you don't just start working out one day just because you're like, I should work out. No, did you see someone that you like had the physique you wanted? Like, did you like see like an ad? Like, did someone talk to you? Like, hey, like, you could be doing something. Like, well, what? There's always a trigger. You don't just change your behavior. For the poem. Before I go in on a poem, I need to make sure, one, that the poet's ready for what they're about to put the hospital for. Some people ask you for feedback, not wanting feedback. They just want validation. Yeah. And if that's what you want, I'm probably the wrong person to give it to you, because I'm not going to validate you just to write an Apollo validate. I'm not. Like, there's so many other people in the poetry space that will do that. There's so many other people in the poetry space that are very affirming, in love, and kind and sweet, and they'll make you feel very good. And I'll tell you where to go. Like, you know what? I don't think I can give you what you're looking for, but this poet, I think, could probably give you more what you look for to what I'm going to be able to do. And by the way, that's it. You need that. Like, if you're an expert in whatever you do, you got to be able to refer people to other people. You got to be like, this isn't me, but this person is doing it. So you got to know other people in the space. But if the poet's serious about it, then we dig in. And usually, if they're really serious about the work and you dig at it long enough, you can find you're basically poking at things until you see the moment of realization on their part for what they need to do. And you can see when it happens. Like, there's usually a physical reaction. Tears, or when we're looking at a poem, I'm not just like saying things to say things. I'm saying things to help you realize something about your poem that you haven't realized.
Yeah. And I think that kind of circles back around to when we're talking about like brand, right? Because for Geoff, you understand that I could, like a lot of other sources, just encourage you, say your writing is great. But I think it would dilute the message that you're putting out there, which is, if you're coming to me, then like we're getting serious about your work again. It's right in the Paul. Yeah. And I think about, something like, again, like this book and a lot of the efforts that Diverses has just done, like, all together, this idea that, okay, this is where we're getting serious about your poems, your poetry career, what you think your poems can do in the world, what you think you can do in the world with your poems as a tool, and like how we can really make those things happen. Like, you're not, if you're just, hey, I just want to write poems just to feel good and have a great day, like this, hey, it's not, I'll see you at the library. But if you're willing to really get serious about, those things, or even to start thinking about getting serious about those things, maybe, looking into Diverses, and definitely the book would be a really good source of that. And with all the people that made the decision to come here today, so thank y'all for doing that. A little bit of time left. I don't know if you have one or two questions maybe in the room.
Can I just make a comment? Because I know Geoff well. And Jeffy has critiqued some work of mine. And yes, I was very sensitive and there's some things personally, and he knew that. However, I will say this in fairness to Geoff. He did take time with me. We live a distance away, but he took time on the phone. And this was a while ago. I don't even know if you remember this, but I had written some poems for a class I had taken. And he was, the feedback was neutral at best. However, he did take a lot of time with me. And what that taught me was flexibility, because I really had to switch my mindset to understand where he was coming from to help me do better in that class. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out. I think that you really have that kindness in you to try and help people. You genuinely want people to do well. And that's what I see as your mother.
I want people who want to do well to do well. Another question?
I appreciate what you're saying, and I'd like to make a comment about this too. I think a lot of times we make assumptions about people and their reputations based on their demeanor and based on how they present themselves. And you kind of talked about how people present themselves earlier on. And I know a lot of people really don't know me, especially in the poetry community, which is really interesting, because you would think more people would know me in the poetry community. I think more people knew me when I was a teacher than as a poet. Most people, I believe, think that because I'm an emotional person and I'm sensitive, that means I'm very sensitive when it comes to critiquing. And that is probably where I am so hardcore, and nothing will get to me. And I will just share this very quick story because I do think it is something that could help other people. When I was in college, Bowling Green undergrad, got a BFA in creative writing, I had a professor who was ruthless and brutal. And he got up on top of a desk and said, it was my turn to be critique, and said, "You want to know what I think about your poem?" And he ripped it into shreds and he threw it at me. And of course you could hear a pin drop, right? And I thought, and I heard my drama teacher in my head say, "Act, don't react." So I looked at him, I said, "Oh, does that mean you don't like my poem?" And then all of a sudden the ball was in my court. Everybody laughed. They were surprised that I said that. And now I will admit, I went home to the dorm room and I cried. But that was the last time. That was the best lesson that I was taught. And then I'd never been upset again. And I realized, no, that was my career time. That was my epiphany, and how important that was. And he told me later that he was trying to, see how tough, what I was made of. Of course, I lied, never told him what happened in the dorm room, but I really did learn from that time on to take whatever it is. And even if you don't think you're going to take that advice, appreciate that gem, and maybe you'll use it for another piece sometime. But there's always something sacred in that moment with the person critiquing your work. And I will forever be grateful for how ruthless he was, because I can take it now. And people, it's hard for a lot of people to believe that, but I can. So thank you for listening to me. I appreciate what you're saying, because I really,
Thank you for sharing that.
It's like Jeff's role model.
Yeah, I kind of had a really good experience with Geoff. First time he ever seen my poetry, and I'm learning a lot at Substation. But what I can say is, it was the first time I'd ever been given so much insight on a poem, and I think that's certainly great. Castello Monza was very from Geoff, and he's also taught me that for also be grave and also get others' feedback as well. That which I was very afraid of, because I always thought that you needed to be affirming and supportive. So I would just say that everything was good, but I know now that you need to say what you really see.
Ideas for books often longer, but in terms of actual writing, probably about 6 months, starting like around January. Pick a quote. So basically, to start off, I would just find the quotes from Marcus that I want to riff on, and then cry because it's like there's so many, and then just one by one kind of hammered them out. So it took about 6 months.
Yeah, and another thing, I think like this is kind of speaks to, I think, the determination and kind of like focus that you kind of bring to projects, because pretty much everything that happens with Diverses are things that, like, you hear Geoff, he'll talk about the infant stage of the idea, like, to just like out in the open, like if we're like either out somewhere, we're like here, or when we're Diverses around the corner. And he's just talking about the idea, and then like he'll say it out loud, and then he'll pull out his little notebook and he'll write it down. And then like, I know that's an event in 6 months. Like, that's gonna be an event at some point down the line. And he just very pragmatic, just very like, I understand, hey, like these are the steps that it's gonna take to kind of create and build this thing out. And again, that's much like, Dante, when talking about like kind of creating your book. It's like you have to really have very clear, pronounced steps in order to bring something like this into the world. Do you have any of your books on you?
No, I don't.
But yeah, do you have another one you want to do, or is that? I have one more. No? Okay, so you have one more meditation that we're gonna meditate on, and then you'll no longer be captive.
Before you do that, what's interesting is hearing from the people that know you, and just the different stories. I don't think you're critiquing people. It sounds like you're consulting. It sounds like there's a true desire to be supported of the person that is sitting across from you, that is sharing their work with you. Some people can make you feel like you're leaving that moment with nothing but disdain and disgust and questioning yourself. But it sounds like you leave people with something that they can think about and recognize. So just in this moment, I'm understanding on a deeper level what it means to critique, but to also make sure that you provide information for a poet to take with them, because they're always thinking, period.
And to kind of piggyback on that, because I think one of the things that, like, I hear from you, and I think it's like something that's very popular. I think when somebody hears critique, they pull back a little bit, because I think there's this feeling that critique is negative. But like Hell's Kitchen, like I watch that show on and off, and Hell's Kitchen is like a really good example of like, there's a master chef who tastes your food, and like, you're thinking, man, I am a great chef. And if you go back to your hometown, you're probably the best chef in your hometown. You know what I mean? You walk into a restaurant, everybody wants to see what you think about their dish or whatever like that. You're probably the best chef in your family, everything. But you go onto this platform that was everybody that you're around, that was everybody. Everybody is that person. But now you're in front of somebody who's like, even around those people, I am like that person. And now they are saying something about your dish. Now they are saying something about your food. And I think about that with poets, because most people that write, that have ideas to write, will never formulate like a full short story, poem, or anything like that. It's like most people. Most people that write poems will never share it with anybody. Like, that's most of the what we would call like poets in the world are people that don't share a single thing. And then of those people, even smaller percentage will share it like on something like a microphone or like a public stage or even publish anything. And so many times by the time you get to that phase, you've gotten validation from A, people that could not even fathom that, and then B, people that could fathom it, but like they're maybe working towards the same goal. And again, Geoff, being a person who's been in the publishing space, who's worked with poems for a very long time, by the time you're presenting your poems to somebody, like, and there's plenty of people in the poetry community that like have that reputation, or like that have like worked with poems for extended amount of time. But by the time you're bringing your poems to them, like you kind of stopped at the people that are just impressed at the fact that you would write a poem. You know what I mean? Like, now these are people that I'm reading poems all the time. Now let's look at your work. And so, yeah, which is just to kind of bring it back to that word critique, people shrink back at that word because they're not used to it maybe at the other spaces that they've encountered their poetry. But I'm like, I think you should be happy about critique, because like somebody willing to critique your work is at the very least like, okay, so this is a callback. Back in the day, there was a show called Writer's Block. And it is back in the day now. Like, I feel like whenever I'm like reference like pre-COVID, but like there's a show, and like, so like that's actually like where me and Geoff like became friends, and we would be in the back of the room. And we would be listening to people's poems, and heckle's a strong word, so that's not. Heckling is not the thing that we were doing, but not quite. But the thing that's funny, the thing that's interesting about that is that one of the things that somebody like after the show, like they were like commenting like, oh, like y'all are like having a great time back here. But I'm like, but we were really paying attention to the poems, which is the only reason why we can make any of the comments, right? Mm-hmm. The only reason why we could even like distill anything.
We were
like
the most respectful.
We were actually the best audience members there was. But yeah, which is just to say that like, somebody critiquing you or somebody like giving you that kind of feedback, even if it's like rough, it's like these are people that have paid attention. They have sat with your work, they have analyzed, they have thought about it, they processed it through their own likes and dislikes and what they've learned, and they've been able to distill something to you that, if your biggest gripe at that point that it's not overly positive and congratulatory, then I think you're taking the wrong thing away. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Mm-hmm. But no, Geoff, you have another?
I got one final one for you. It's number 83. Many wish to be rid of you. Marcus Aurelius. To be liked by everyone is a strategy to be forgotten. Athletes, Hall of Famers in their field are both beloved and despised. Companies like Apple, cities like New York, apps like Duolingo all benefit from having their fans and their detractors. Praise and criticism demonstrate an ability to move beyond apathy. To establish a connection with people's emotions means landing a spot at a conscious and subconscious level. Consider Seth Godin's words. The opposite of remarkable is very good. Very good can be enjoyable. The painting has great shading and detail. The song has a really solid beat. The photograph really captures a smile. Very good is work that no one remembers. Very good work offers little reason to tell others about it. The bad restaurant gets flocked with hundreds of bad reviews. A very good restaurant might get 3 ratings, all of which have 5 stars. The bad movie gets panned by critics as it rakes in millions of dollars. A very good movie disappoints at the box office. The bad song gets radio play. A very good song collects dust on a streaming platform. Craft is not going to be what separates me from others. Craft is the expectation. Instead, I must consider what about my work is going to make people want to share how much they love it. What about my work is going to make people want to share how much they hate it?